All right, let's talk a little bit about social and constructivist perspectives on motivation. Now, I want you to keep in mind that we are not able to cover all of the possible theories of motivation out there. So, we're going to look at three kind of areas of it. So, in the previous lesson, we talked about the evolutionary approach of instincts, we talked about drives and needs. In this particular video, we're going to talk about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, goal priming, and self-regulation. So again, just to recap what we're talking about, when we're talking about motivation, we're talking about the psychological driving force that enables action in the pursuit of a specific outcome. Now, according to self-determination theory, motivation can stem from two places. So it can stem from a place of what we call intrinsic motivation. And so, according to the authors of this theory, that would be doing an activity for its inherent satisfactions rather than for some separable consequence. So these activities are usually self-determined. So we decide, we kind of choose them. Another place our motivation can stem from is extrinsic motivation. Now, extrinsic motivation is whenever we do something in order to obtain some separable outcome. We're doing it to achieve some type of goal outside of ourselves. So intrinsic motivation, it's coming from within us. Extrinsic motivation is coming from outside of us. Now, the basics of this theory of motivation are as such. Motivation ranges on a large continuum. So on one extreme is what the authors call amotivation, which is lacking the intention to act or to do anything. And on the other extreme, we've got intrinsic motivation. So that's doing that task for the sheer enjoyment of it, right? Now, in the middle, we've got a range of extrinsic motivation and subcategories of extrinsic motivation. And it moves from kind of more restrictive to less restrictive reasons for engaging in an activity. Now, one of the key tenets here is that the degree to which a person has internalized and integrated the values into their sense of self will determine the degree of motivation that we display. So what does that mean? Well, if we're doing it simply because we love it and because to us it's important, then it is likely something that's arising from intrinsic motivation. On the other hand, it's possible to have a very unrestricted type of extrinsic motivation where we recognize that we're doing something because it's important, and while the goal may be outside of us, we are also have integrated and internalized a lot of the values into our sense of self for why we're engaging in that task. And we'll explain that in a little bit more here. The other thing about self-determination theory that's kind of cool is that it says that motivation also depends on how much control we think we have over the current situation. And so it introduces this idea of what we call locus of control. Now, if we have an external locus of control, we really believe that achievements and outcome are determined by luck, by fate, or by other factors outside of us. Whereas if we have an internal locus of control, our achievements and our outcomes are determined by our own decisions and by our own efforts. Now, other cognitive processes in this theory also impact our overall motivation. So for example, if there's rewards attached to it, if we're trying to impress someone else, if we're doing it simply because we enjoy it, all of these processes are important and really will help us to determine whether this is intrinsically or extrinsically motivated behavior. I'm going to show you just a brief kind of chart of this. You don't have to memorize this, but just kind of as a way to show you. So definitely here on the far side, we've got an amotivated state. We are not acting at all. Some of the processes that we would see with that is that just low personal competence, it's just not relevant, we're not intentional about it, and there's a very impersonal kind of locus of causality. Now here in extrinsic motivation, we go from everything being on the very far side, closest to amotivation, where it's what we call external regulation, so the reasons for engaging in this is just outside of us. We're really just stuck in doing this thing because, we're very aware of the rewards or the punishments or consequences, and everything is very external to us, right? And then on the far, right side, we see this area of integration. And so this is still an extrinsically motivated thing that we're engaging in, but there seems to be kind of a congruence for us, that we've got a synthesis of these goals that are important for us, and we see that down here, locus of causality shifts from being very impersonal to being external to being less so to being internal, which is very similar to people who are intrinsically motivated, right? And so for people who are intrinsically motivated, it's all about interest, enjoyment, inherent satisfaction, and the locus of control, the locus of causality is within them. That's very internal. They feel that they are able to act on their world. Now, this theory is very popular in education, it's popular in a whole bunch of circles, but there are some limitations to it that are important to consider when we are looking at motivation as a whole. One of the things to me that seems to stick out is that this theory assumes that everyone is innately motivated towards fulfilling their goals. But certain goals are not dictated by intrinsic motivations. In fact, many of the goals that we strive to achieve in our life are really extrinsically determined. And so we have to then make the choice of how we integrate those goals within our sense of self and our sense of competence. Another kind of challenge is that I think it creates some either or dichotomies that don't really fit with reality. So for example, it's difficult to say that a student is wholly and fully intrinsically motivated in school. It's possible that someone could be intrinsically motivated in one subject but very extrinsically motivated in another subject. One of the areas, though, for me, that I find this theory to be challenging on is I think it creates a lot of confusion regarding the use of rewards. Now, a lot of the research by Ryan and DC have showed that, if you begin to reward people for doing an intrinsically motivated activity, well, that's going to decrease the likelihood that they're going to do it in the future, and it kind of shifts some of that locus of control and or removes the pleasure from doing the activity. However, there's another problem here, though, and so kind of what's happened is that, well, because of giving rewards for intrinsically motivated behavior is going to lead to reduced outcomes, people have said, well, maybe we shouldn't reward things, right? The problem is, though, what do we do about people who are not intrinsically motivated, right? This theory rests on the idea that if we're rewarding intrinsic behavior, intrinsically motivated behavior, it's going to decrease outcomes. The problem is, though, in reality, many people are not intrinsically motivated. I mean, it'd be a great thing if we could spend our days being intrinsically motivated by the things that we do, but that's just not reality. So what do we do then about people that are not intrinsically motivated? Because here's the thing. Research has shown that rewards do work. So we got to balance these things out in tension here a bit. The other thing for me too, as someone who tends to work in a more developmental context, is that self-determination theory really does lack a developmental focus. We know that younger children are much more motivated by external outcomes, while older children are more able to be internally motivated. And part of that is just due to cognitive development, and part of that is just due to the life experiences and the motivations that are required by kids at different developmental stages. So this theory does lack a developmental focus, which makes it not useful in every kind of, just broadly applied, I guess. Well, let's switch a little bit from this idea of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, and we'll talk about goals and goal settings. So a goal is our mental idea of how we'd like for things to turn out. And as you can see, would be very important for motivation, right? So goals can be very clearly defined, or they can be a little bit more abstract, but these are fundamental guides for us. Some of our goals are perhaps biological in origin, but many of them are more social cultural, and some are just very unique to us as a person. So goal pursuit and motivations are products of personal characteristics and situational factors. Now we know that actually within our environment, the cues can actually activate or prime goals. So when a goal is primed, that means that its conditions have been met that sets it into place that we're more likely to respond to that goal. The activation for this can be conscious, such that we're kind of aware of what environmental cues are triggering us to do something, or sometimes it can be a non-conscious goal pursuit. Now, before we go and we adopt a goal, we kind of have to wrestle out a little bit about what our commitment to a goal is. And one of the things that makes it likely for us to engage in a goal is that we find it something that's valuable as well as attainable. And we tend to adopt goals that are likely to bring a very positive outcome for us. So really, if we wanted to put it into an equation, it'd be this idea of commitment equals value of the goal times the expectancy that we will achieve it, right? It's not helpful for us to set unrealistic goals, and in fact, our commitment reflects that. If the goal is extremely unrealistic, we're much more unlikely to actually follow through with it. Now, committing to a goal can occur without much conscious deliberation. We can just be like, fine, I'm going to do this goal and go with it. That can be a good thing sometimes, but oftentimes that leads to some problems for us. Now, we don't always act on our goals in every single context. So even if we have a goal, goal priming plays a significant and important kind of role for us. So cues in our immediate environment can have a strong influence on the pursuit of goals to things that we're already committed. So for example, if I see running shoes when I get up in the morning, perhaps, and I've already committed to running, a 5K, I'm probably more likely to put on those shoes and go out and do it. Um, but that's hopefully we need those kind of primes, I guess, in our environment in order to sometimes follow through with it. So in our memory, goals are organized in associative networks. So each goal is connected to a corresponding means, so the activities and the objects that help us to attain that goal. So cues related to the goal or to the means can activate or prime the pursuit of that goal. After goal priming, the motivation to act on the goal peaks and then it slowly declines as we move away from the primer, or if we after we've done pursuing that goal. So after I've ran, probably not going to be like, if I see those running shoes, they're probably not going to say to me like, all right, time to get out there again, right? Now, the interesting thing is that activation of a goal and accompanying motivation can influence our behavior and our judgment. So the textbook talks about an interesting study by Balcetis and Dunning, where they were asked in this little picture here at the bottom to either to see a letter or to see a number. And so if they were primed to see a letter, people were more likely to see a B. Whereas if you were primed to see a number, you would be more likely to see 13. Goals also exert a strong influence on how people evaluate the objects and the people around them. So, priming a goal can lead to behaviors like this that are consistent with the goal, even though we're not really necessarily aware of why. So, we may not know what the source of the motivation is, but if we are primed, we may still respond to the goal. It's kind of an interesting thing. We're going to switch from goal priming and we'll talk a little bit about self-regulation. So many of the behaviors we like to engage in are inconsistent with our achieving our goals, right? So maybe you want to be physically fit, but also cake, it's challenging. So we have to find ways to self-regulate our behavior to lead to the outcomes that we're wanting. So self-regulation refers to the process through which individuals, we alter our perceptions, feelings, and actions in pursuit of a very specific kind of goal. So for example, if we're really self-regulated, perhaps we'll fill up then with fruits at a dessert party instead of with cake. Self-regulation also plays a super duper important role and is a very key aspect for learning how to regulate our emotions. Now, self-regulation involves kind of two basic stages, and each one of these stages has its own kind of mindset involved. So first, we've got to decide on the goals that we are going to pursue. And so, that's what we call the deliberative phase. So during this phase, we're deliberating and we're deciding on what goals we're going to pursue, right? After we decide which goals to follow, we get into what's called the implemental phase, right? So we're implementing and planning specific actions related to this goal. Now, during these phases in goal pursuit, there's also different self-regulatory orientations that are important. So not only are we deliberating and then implementing, we can also have a prevention focus for why we're engaging in a goal, right? And so prevention focuses would be we're emphasizing safety, responsibility, security needs. These are kind of our oughts or our shoulds, right? We should do this. We should exercise because it leads to better health, right? We could also have a promotion focus, and so that's why when we view our goals as ideals, and we kind of emphasize things like our hopes, accomplishments, advancement needs, those things become more important for us. So a goal is something that we want to do, right? Now, which one of these orientations is better? Well, like many things in psychology, it depends. If we emphasize potential losses, that's more likely to motivate someone with a prevention focus. But if we emphasize potential gains, that's more likely to motivate people that have a promotion focus for their life and for their goals. Now, the textbook also talks a bit about a cybernetic process of self-regulation. And really, what it's talking about is what are the feelings that arise from when we compare our actual versus our expected progress during trying to meet a goal. So during goal pursuit, we kind of calculate the discrepancy between our current and our desired end state. And after we determine how big the difference is, we then begin to act to close that gap. Now, if there's a higher than expected rate of closing the discrepancy, right, we're moving faster than we thought, that creates a very positive signal for us and some positive feelings. It gives us a little bit of hope, doesn't it? And that can be sometimes something that's very important for us, for triggering us and for keeping us going, right? So if we begin with this process of comparing our actual versus expected progress, if we are closing at a faster gap, that helps us to form those positive feelings, makes us more likely to continue through with our goal. Now, our commitment towards a goal results from our perceived value and the attainability of that goal, whereas progress describes the perception of a reduced discrepancy between the current state and the desired state. So that's the cybernetic process thing there. So after we've achieved a goal, if we interpret our previous actions as a sign of commitment to it, they tend to highlight the pursuit of that goal. And so we tend to prioritize it and we put more effort into it. All right, I'm going to pause here for now, and we will pick up things in a little bit again. Bye.